The alien council crossed into human territory, not one came back alive. The proximity alarm went off at 4:17 Station Standard Time. I was not asleep. Commanders at Outpost Vega 9 do not sleep well, and I had not slept well in years. I was sitting at my console with a cold cup of coffee when the screen lit up like a warning fire, and the sound cut through the quiet hum of the station like something sharp and final. 14 contacts. Fold space exit signatures. All of them large. I leaned forward and pulled the readings closer. My eyes went over the data twice before I accepted what I was seeing. 14 Council warships had just dropped out of faster-than-light travel inside our border zone, not outside it, not near it, inside it. No warning transmission. No treaty flag. No identification ping. Just mass and heat and weapons arrays that were already powered up. I pressed the station-wide alert with one hand and grabbed my headset with the other. All stations, this is Commander Asha Reyes. We have 14 unidentified Council-class warships at bearing 04/72. Battle stations. Now. The station responded the way a well-trained crew always does, not with panic, but with speed. Boots hit the floor. Doors slid open. Voices overlapped in short, clipped phrases that meant people were moving and thinking at the same time. I opened the long-range scanner feed and stared at those 14 ships. Each one was roughly 4 times the size of our largest patrol vessel. They were arranged in a forward wedge formation, the kind of shape a force uses when it plans to push through something, not around it. They were not here to talk. Let me tell you something about the Galactic Council that most people in the outer colonies already know, but that the people back on Earth sometimes forget. The Council is made up of 5 elder species. They have been traveling the stars for thousands of years longer than humanity has. They have standing fleets, established trade routes, and a legal system that spans dozens of inhabited worlds. They are, by every measurement they use to measure such things, more advanced than us. They joined them 30 years ago. Humanity, I mean. We were invited, or more accurately, we were permitted, to take a seat at the council table after first contact was established with the Keth, the oldest of the 5 elder species. It was not a warm welcome. It was more like the way you might allow a stray animal into the house on a cold night. Tolerant. Conditional. Quietly certain that the animal would never really understand the furniture. They called us a Class 2 nuisance civilization in their internal documents. We found that out later. At the time, we simply knew that when we spoke in council chambers, the other delegates listened the way you listen to a child who is telling you about a dream, politely, without real attention. We were the youngest species at the table. The smallest. The ones who had only been in space, in any meaningful way, for a few centuries. The ones who still got into arguments and made emotional decisions and sometimes acted before thinking. That was what they said about us, anyway. They were not entirely wrong. But they were wrong about what that meant. The council fleet sat inside our border for 4 minutes before I received the transmission. It came through on the official diplomatic channel, which told me they were not embarrassed about this. They wanted it on record. The voice belonged to Fleet Admiral Corrin of the Keth Directorate. I had met him once, at a council function 2 years earlier. He was tall, gray-skinned, and spoke with the deliberate slowness of someone who had never once been told to hurry up. Commander Reyes of the United Earth Federation. This fleet has entered the Vega border zone under authorization of Council Directive 774, regarding the enforcement of the Kareth mining accords. Humanity has been found in violation of subsection 12, pertaining to unauthorized extraction in the Dern asteroid field. This fleet is here to correct that violation. Stand down your station defenses and prepare for inspection. I listened to the whole thing without moving. Then I reached over and opened a direct uplink to Earth Command. I sent the full transmission, the full scanner data, and my own assessment in under 90 seconds. The reply came back in 4 minutes, which was fast enough that I knew someone senior had been watching. The order was 3 sentences long. Hold them at the border. Do not allow further advance. Authorization granted for full defensive response at your discretion. I read it twice. Then I closed the uplink and sat back. 6 patrol ships. That was what Outpost Vega 9 had. 6 mid-class vessels with standard armaments, good crews, and captains I trusted completely. Against 14 Council warships that had their weapons already hot. The math was not comfortable. But math is only one part of a fight. I opened a channel to all 6 captains at once. They appeared on my screen in a grid, 6 faces, 6 different expressions, all of them steady. "You've all seen the data," I said. "You know what we have and you know what they have. I'm not going to waste your time pretending this is simple. What I will tell you is this: they crossed our border without permission, without warning, and with weapons ready. We did not invite them here. We do not owe them passage. Whatever happens next, we are on the right side of this line." Captain Owen Garrett of the patrol ship Alderan spoke first. He was a quiet man who rarely wasted words. "What are your orders, Commander?" "Hold formation. Do not fire first. But the moment they advance another kilometer, we respond with everything we have and we do not stop until they do." Nobody argued. Nobody hesitated. I opened the channel to Admiral Corrin. "Admiral, this is Commander Asha Reyes, United Earth Federation Border Command. You are currently inside human territory without authorization. The Kareth Mining Accords dispute is a matter for the arbitration panel under Council Charter Article 9. A military fleet is not an appropriate response to a trade disagreement. I am formally requesting that you reverse course and exit human space immediately. This is your only warning." There was a pause on the other end. "And then, I want you to understand that I remember this clearly, because some moments stick to you like something permanent," Admiral Corrin laughed. It was a short sound. Dismissive. The kind of laugh that does not expect to be questioned afterward. "Commander," he said, and the way he said it carried the full weight of everything the Council thought of us. "This is not a negotiation. Stand down your vessels or we will move through them." I noted the time on my console. 4:31 Station Standard. I looked at the screen showing those 14 ships. I thought about the 38 men and women on my station. I thought about the colonies behind us, Vega, 4, Meridian Station, the farming settlements on Prox, 7 where people were probably sleeping right now under a quiet sky, not knowing any of this was happening. Then I thought about the order from Earth Command. "Full defensive response at your discretion." I switched to all station comms. "All units, this is Reyes. The Council fleet has refused to withdraw. They are treating our border as an obstacle rather than a boundary. We are going to remind them what a boundary means." I switched back to the Admiral's channel, just long enough to say one more thing. "You were warned." Then I closed the channel and opened the tactical grid. What the Council did not know, what they could not have known, because they had never fought us, not really, is that those 6 patrol ships were not the whole picture. They were the visible part. The part you were supposed to see. Every commander on the frontier knows that a border defense is not just what you park at the border. It is what you hide behind the border, waiting. 17 minutes before the Council fleet arrived, a long-range passive sensor array had picked up the fold space buildup. I had not waited for them to finish emerging before I sent a secondary alert, a coded signal on a tight beam channel that did not show up on the Council's communication intercepts. The reply to that signal came in the form of a carrier ship, the UEF vessel Calder, sliding out from behind the dark side of Vega 9's outer moon on silent running. No active sensors. No drive emissions. Just cold metal moving in the dark. The Calder was carrying 400 Marines from the 6th Strike Division. The Council fleet did not know the Calder existed. They were too busy looking at my 6 patrol ships. Admiral Corrin gave the order to advance at 4:44 Station Standard. His fleet began to move forward in their wedge formation, slow and certain, the way something large moves when it believes nothing can stop it. My 6 ships moved to meet them. And somewhere in the dark behind the Council's left flank, 400 Marines were already suiting up. I watched the tactical display with both hands flat on my console. The distance between our ships and theirs was shrinking. Everyone on the station was breathing a little faster. I was breathing normally, and I do not know exactly why. Maybe because I had already made every decision that mattered. The rest was just watching it happen. The Council fleet crossed the engagement threshold at 4:51. I said, "All ships, weapons free." And the dark between the stars became something else entirely. Part 2 begins here. The briefing they gave us before we boarded the Calder used a lot of careful language. Words like engagement and response and tactical necessity. Military people talk that way sometimes, especially when they are talking to Marines who are about to do something that cannot be undone. I am Corporal Dara Osei, 6th Strike Division, and I will tell you what the briefing actually meant. We were going in hard, we were going in fast, and we were not coming out until the job was done. We launched from the Calder's Bay in drop pods, 12 to a pod, 40 pods in total. The pods are not comfortable. They are built for speed and for surviving re-entry into atmospheres, which means they are dense and narrow and smell like compressed air and old fear. You sit with your knees almost touching the person across from you, and you wait, and you listen to the hull creak, and you think about whatever you think about before a fight. I thought about my mother, who had told me when I joined the division that she understood but that she would prefer it if I came home. I thought about the look on her face when she said it. I thought about the Council fleet sitting in our space like it belonged there. That last thought made the waiting easier. The Council flagship was called the Sovereign Reach. It was the largest of the 14 ships, nearly 900 meters long, and it was positioned at the center of the wedge formation. According to our intelligence, and UEF intelligence on Council vessel layouts is better than the Council suspects, the Sovereign Reach carried approximately 600 crew, a command deck on its upper third, and internal security teams composed of Keth Wardens. Keth Wardens are serious. The Keth are a tall, strong species, and their warriors are trained from early age in something close to what you might call formal combat. They learn postures and stances and a strict code about when to advance and when to hold. They are disciplined and they are dangerous, and in a straight, open fight, a Keth Warden is not someone you want to underestimate. The key word in that sentence is open. Our pods hit the Sovereign Reach's hull on the starboard side, below the secondary weapon emplacements, exactly where the armor plating was thinnest. The breach charges fired and the pods bit into the hull, and then the doors blew open and we were inside. I was the third person through the door of Pod 14. The corridor we entered was wide and lit in the cool blue-white light that Council vessels use. The floors were smooth. The ceiling was high. And there were two Keth Wardens standing 20 meters ahead of us, already turning toward the noise. They were wearing full armor, a segmented, dark material that covers everything from the neck down. They carried long-handled energy weapons that the division briefing called arc staffs, which deliver a charge that can knock a human off their feet and keep them down. They were trained. They were ready. They were also expecting an enemy that fought the way the Council fought, forward, announced, structured. Private Glenn Marsh went left along the wall. Private Suki Tanner went right. I went straight down the middle, low, moving fast. The Wardens raised their arc staffs and the one on the left swung toward Glenn and the one on the right tracked Suki, and for about 1 second they had perfectly divided their attention between two threats. I reached the near Warden in that second. It was done quickly and professionally. Glenn handled the second. That was how the first 4 minutes went throughout the ship. 40 pods, 400 Marines, and we moved through the Sovereign Reach the way water moves through a space, finding every gap, filling every corridor, never stopping, never forming a neat line that could be held against us. The Keth Wardens were good. Let me be clear about that. They fought hard and they fought smart, and several of our people went down in those first minutes. Private Ade Collins took a hit from an arc staff in Corridor 7 and was down for 11 minutes before the medics reached him. Lance Corporal Faye Drummond took a worse hit near the engineering deck and had to be pulled back to the pod. These are real people and what happened to them matters. But the Wardens were trained for a kind of fight that had rules built into it. Advance, challenge, engage, withdraw if necessary. There is honor in that system, and it works well when both sides understand the same rules. We did not fight by those rules. We did not fight without honor, either. We did not harm anyone who was already down, and we did not touch non-combat crew. But we did not announce ourselves before we entered a room, and we did not form up in the corridor and wait for the Wardens to form up across from us. We came from 3 directions at once, and when they responded to one direction we were already at another, and we did not stop moving until there was nothing left to respond to. By the 20-minute mark, we held the command deck. I was with Sergeant Neil Grant when we pushed through the final door into the Sovereign Reach's bridge. Admiral Corrin was there, tall, gray-skinned, exactly as I had seen in the mission briefing photos. He was standing at the center of his bridge with his hands at his sides, not fighting, not surrendering, just standing. 3 of his officers were still at their stations. The others were against the far wall, hands visible. Grant took the Admiral into custody. Professionally, without theatrics. I went to the nearest console and pulled the data chip from the access port that our intelligence team had told us would be there. Then I looked at the display on the console, a mission overview document, still open, from the Council's own command files. I read it in about 40 seconds. The document was titled Operation Correction, Strategic Authorization. It outlined the mission objective, the expected resistance level, and a probability assessment. At the bottom of the assessment, under the heading Target Species Risk Profile, was a line that I have thought about many times since. It said, Human Federation vessels present minimal strategic threat. Psychological resistance expected. Physical resistance rated as low probability. Mission success probability, 94%. Minimal strategic threat. I pulled the chip from the port and put it in the chest pocket of my suit. I thought it was worth keeping. Outside the flagship, the battle in space was not going the way the Council had planned. Commander Reyes and her 6 patrol ships had not moved aside. They had engaged the Council fleet directly, and they had done something that the Council's tactical models apparently had not accounted for. They had forced the wedge formation to break, pulling the outer ships away from the center by targeting the formation's weakest structural point, which is not the front of a wedge but its hinges. When a wedge breaks apart, its ships lose coordinated fire. They become individual vessels instead of a fleet. And 6 well-handled patrol ships against individual Council vessels is a much more balanced situation than 6 against 14. By the time the Sovereign Reach went dark and quiet under our hands, 9 of the Council's remaining ships had been disabled or forced into retreat posture. 2 had sustained damage serious enough to remove them from any offensive action. 3 ships broke and ran. I watched it on the bridge display, standing next to Admiral Corrin, who was watching it too with an expression I could not fully read. He was not panicking. He was doing something harder than that, he was understanding. Where are those 3 going? I asked, more to myself than to him. Grant checked the heading data. He looked at me. They're running deeper into the system, he said. Toward the inner planets. I thought about that for a moment. Toward the inner planets meant toward the colonies. Toward the shipping lanes and the research stations and the farming worlds. Toward everything that human space actually contains, beyond the border outposts that most people think of when they think of the frontier. What they did not know was what was waiting for them there. I thought about the people on those 3 ships. Officers, crew members, people who had followed their admiral into what they believed was a low-risk enforcement mission. They were running now because they were frightened, and I understood that. Fear makes sense after the plan falls apart. But running deeper into human space is not an escape. It is a different kind of mistake. I secured the data chip in my pocket. I looked at Admiral Corrin, who was still staring at the display where his fleet was coming apart. Admiral, I said, and I kept my voice level, this was not what you expected. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, without looking at me, no. It was not. That was the most honest thing I heard from any of them that day. Part 3 begins here. I have worked in orbital defense my entire career, and in that time I have developed one firm belief: the most important thing a defense system can do is be invisible until it is needed. My name is Director Yun Park, and I run Earth Orbital Defense from Luna Station. On the day the Council fleet came apart at the Vega border, I was already at my post. We had been monitoring the long-range feed since the first proximity alarm sounded at Vega 9, and when Commander Reyes sent her uplink to Earth Command, the response that went back to her passed through my desk. When I saw that 3 Council ships had broken formation and were heading inward, I did not raise my voice. I did not send an emergency alert. I set my coffee on the edge of the console and pulled up the inter-system defense grid on my main screen and began making notes. Let me explain something about Earth's defense infrastructure that is not common knowledge, even among people who work in space. When humanity first began building out its orbital defense network, it was the early 22nd century, and the fear that drove the construction was not alien invasion. It was each other. Nations on Earth were still competing, still distrustful, still building systems to protect themselves from other humans. That era eventually ended, thankfully, but the infrastructure did not get dismantled. Engineers do not like to dismantle things that work. Politicians do not like to remove things that make their constituents feel safe. So the network grew. Year by year, decade by decade, it grew. Sensor arrays around Mars. Rail launch platforms on the lunar surface. Autonomous intercept platforms in the asteroid corridors. Deep system listening posts that can detect a ship's drive signature at extreme range. Electromagnetic suppression grids originally designed to black out battlefield communications, scaled up and repurposed for space operations. When humanity joined the Galactic Council and made first contact with species that had been traveling the stars for millennia, there were internal debates about whether to disclose the full extent of our defense network. The decision was made, at the highest levels, to disclose only what was required by the transparency provisions of the Entry Treaty. Which was not very much. It was not deception. It was simply the very old and very human habit of not showing all your cards at once. The 3 Council ships came in on a direct heading toward the Mars corridor, which is the main traffic lane between the outer border zones and the inner system. They were moving fast, drive signatures running hot, which told me they were not trying to be subtle. They were trying to put distance between themselves and what had happened at Vega 9. I contacted the commander of the Mars corridor station, Captain Elise Ford, on a secure channel. 3 incoming, I said. Council class. No authorization. No distress flag. Weapons status unknown. I see them, she said. She had a calm voice. I had worked with her for 9 years and her voice was always calm. I want the corridor suppression grid active in 4 minutes, I said. Full spectrum. Done, she said. The suppression grid had been built, originally, to black out communications across a wide area in the event of a coordinated attack on Earth's orbital infrastructure. It works by flooding a specific region of space with layered electromagnetic interference on every frequency band that Council communication systems use. When the grid activates, signals from inside the coverage area cannot get out, and signals from outside cannot get in. The ships inside the grid can still communicate with each other, but they cannot reach the wider galaxy. The 3 Council ships entered the grid's coverage area at approximately 9:12 inter-system time. I watched the suppression confirmation light go green on my board. Inside that corridor, those 3 ships were now invisible to the rest of the Council. No status report could leave. No distress call could reach Council space. For all anyone outside the grid knew, those ships had simply gone silent. That silence was intentional. I want to be honest about something. I am not a person who finds satisfaction in conflict. I have spent my career building systems designed to make conflict unnecessary. Every sensor array and every intercept platform I have overseen was built because I believe, genuinely, that the strongest kind of security is the kind that never has to be used. Standing at my console watching those 3 ships move deeper into the corridor, I felt none of the things that stories about moments like this usually describe. No excitement. No anger. What I felt was closer to sadness, mixed with the very particular kind of steadiness that comes from knowing exactly what you have to do and being fully prepared to do it. These were crew members on those ships. Trained officers, people with families somewhere, people who had boarded their vessels that morning believing they were part of an enforcement operation that would meet no real resistance. They had been wrong about that, and now they were frightened, and now they were inside a defense grid they did not know existed. I gave the order for the intercept platforms to move into position. The platforms are automated, they are not crewed, which matters, because it means the decisions about their activation rest entirely with the director, which is to say with me. I had authorization from Earth Command, granted within 6 minutes of Reyes's initial uplink. The authorization was clear. Any unauthorized vessel inside the inner system defense perimeter that fails to respond to withdrawal commands is subject to full intercept response. I opened a direct broadcast channel to all 3 ships simultaneously. Council vessels, this is Director Yun Park, Earth Orbital Defense, Luna Station. You are currently inside the inner system defense perimeter of the United Earth Federation. Your communications are being suppressed. You have entered this zone without authorization. I am ordering you to cut your drives, hold position, and prepare for escort to a secured holding point. You will not be harmed if you comply. This is your only opportunity to comply. There was a pause. Then all 3 ships began broadcasting at once, overlapping transmissions, most of them directed outward, toward Council space, trying to punch through the suppression grid. None of them got through. One transmission was directed at me. It was from the senior officer of the lead ship, a Keth commander whose name I did not catch in the initial identification burst. He said that this action constituted an illegal detention of Council military vessels and that there would be a formal response from the full Council at the highest level. I listened to the whole thing. Then I said, very calmly, Commander, your fleet entered human space without authorization and with weapons active. You had the opportunity to withdraw and did not take it. The consequences you are experiencing now are a direct result of choices made by your admiral, not by us. I am still offering you the chance to hold position and avoid further incident. Please think carefully. He did not respond. The 3 ships increased their drive output. They were trying to push through, to go faster, to get somewhere that made sense to them. There is no place in the inner system they could have reached that would have changed the situation. The grid extended well beyond the Mars corridor. The platforms were already in position. Captain Ford's voice came over my earpiece. They're accelerating. I see it, I said. Director. I know, Elise. I gave the order. The intercept response was precise and it was fast. The platforms do not operate the way warships operate in a battle. They are fixed-purpose systems, designed for one job, and they do that job very well. All 3 Council ships were neutralized within a window of under 6 minutes. No debris crossed the Mars corridor threshold. The operation was, from a technical standpoint, exactly what we trained for. I stood at my console and watched the confirmation readings come in. Green. 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 The inner system grid went quiet again. Captain Ford came back on the channel. Confirmed. All 3 contacts neutralized. No debris beyond containment boundary. Grid standing by. Thank you, Elise, I said. Begin post-engagement logging. Full documentation. Every second, every order, every reading. I want it all on record. Understood, she said. I set down my pen. I looked at my coffee, still sitting on the edge of the console, cold now. 14 Council warships had entered human space that morning. Earth Command confirmed the count just before noon. 0 had exited. Not one had made it back to Council space. Not one had managed to send a successful status transmission after the suppression grid activated. Somewhere on the other side of the border, in a Council chamber or a command center or an admiral's headquarters, there were people waiting for a report that was never going to arrive. In a few hours, they would begin to realize that something had gone wrong. Then they would begin to realize how wrong it had gone. Then they would have to decide what to do about it. I hoped, quietly, that they would decide to talk. I authorized the post-engagement network report and sent it to Earth Command with my full signature and a detailed log of every authorization request and every decision I had made in the preceding hours. Every order was documented. Every response was on the record. I had learned something, a long time ago, from a mentor who had also worked in defense infrastructure. She told me that a response is only as strong as its justification. Anyone can use force. What separates a defense from an act of aggression is the ability to show, clearly and completely, that you acted within the rules and that the rules were just. I was going to need that documentation. Because what came next was not going to happen in space. It was going to happen in a chamber with lights and delegates and very long memories. And we needed to be ready for that too. Part 4 begins here. I walked into the Galactic Council's Grand Chamber alone. I want to be specific about that, because it mattered. I could have walked in with a full diplomatic team, translators, legal advisors, aides carrying data pads. The UEF had offered all of it. I declined. Not out of stubbornness. Out of calculation. My name is Leila Vasquez, and I have been a diplomat for the United Earth Federation for 19 years. In that time I have sat in a lot of rooms where the other side had more leverage than we did. I have learned that the way you enter a room tells people something before you have spoken a single word. Walking in alone, carrying one briefcase, and sitting down without hurrying tells people that you are not afraid. Whether or not that is completely true is, professionally speaking, beside the point. The Grand Chamber seats several hundred delegates. On the day I arrived, it was full. I had not expected it to be empty, but I had not expected it to be quite this full. Every species on the council had sent representation, and the public gallery was packed with journalists and observers from a dozen affiliated worlds. The Vega incident, as it was already being called in the press, had become the most discussed event in galactic politics in recent memory. I set my briefcase on the table. I sat down. I folded my hands. Council Chair Veth of the Orion Collective opened the session. The Orions are a small, pale species with very large eyes and voices that sound like something between a whisper and a chime. Veth had been council chair for 11 years and was considered by most political analysts to be the most careful and measured leader the council had seen in a generation. She opened the session by asking the chamber for silence, which it gave her. Then she turned to me. "Ambassador Vasquez," she said, "the United Earth Federation is facing a formal complaint from the Council's security panel. As you are aware, 14 Council vessels entered the Vega border zone 6 days ago as part of an authorized enforcement operation. None of those vessels have returned. None have made contact. The UEF has confirmed their destruction. The Council is requesting a full accounting, and the security panel has presented preliminary findings that describe these events as a disproportionate and unauthorized use of force." I let her finish. I did not nod, did not adjust my posture, did not change my expression. "Thank you, Chair Veth," I said. "I am prepared to give the Council a full accounting. I am also prepared to present evidence. And when I have done both of those things, I will have a proposal for the Council regarding the path forward." Veth gestured for me to proceed. I opened my briefcase. The first document I placed on the table was the communication log from Commander Reyes's station at Vega 9, beginning from the moment the Council fleet exited fold space. Time-stamped. Certified. Complete. I slid a copy to the Council's official record keeper and kept one on the table in front of me. At 4:17 Station Standard Time, I said, 14 Council warships exited fold space inside the UEF's established border zone without prior notification, without a treaty flag, and with active weapons systems. This is documented on pages 1 through 4 of the communication log. I heard movement in the chamber. Not loud movement. The subtle shift that happens when a room full of people adjusts to information that is not quite what they expected. Commander Reyes, I continued, immediately transmitted a request for identification and purpose, in accordance with border protocol. The response from Fleet Admiral Corrin, transmitted on the official diplomatic channel, is reproduced on page 7. I read the relevant section aloud. I read the part where the Admiral stated that the fleet was there to correct a violation. I read the part where he told Reyes to stand down. Then I placed the second document on the table. "This is Council Directive 774, I said. The document under which the fleet claimed authorization for this operation. I direct the Chamber's attention to subsection 4, paragraph 2, which describes the conditions under which a Council enforcement fleet may enter a member state's territory." I gave everyone a moment to find the relevant paragraph. Subsection 4, paragraph 2 states that an enforcement fleet may enter member state territory only after formal notification of the member state's governing body, and only after a response period of no less than 30 standard days, and only if arbitration through the Council's designated trade panel has been attempted and has failed. None of those conditions had been met. Not one. I let the Chamber sit with that for a moment. Then I placed the third document on the table. This is the operational planning document for Operation Correction, recovered from the Sovereign Reaches command systems during the engagement at Vega 9. I will note for the record that this document was prepared and authorized at the Council's Directorate Command level, not by Admiral Corrin independently. This was not a rogue operation. This was a planned, authorized mission. I watched the Chamber carefully. Some delegates were reading the document as it appeared on their screens. The UEF translation team had prepared it in every relevant language the night before. Others were looking at each other. A few were looking at me. I picked up the fourth document. This is a probability assessment included in the Operation Correction planning file. I direct the Chamber's attention to the final section, which provides a risk profile for the mission. Specifically, to this line. I read it aloud. Human Federation vessels present minimal strategic threat. Psychological resistance expected. Physical resistance rated as low probability. Mission success probability, 94%. The Chamber was very quiet. I want to be clear, I said, that I am not raising this to score a rhetorical point. I am raising it because it demonstrates that this operation was premised on a fundamental misunderstanding of the United Earth Federation's capabilities and intentions. The Council did not send 14 warships into our space because of a trade dispute. The Council sent 14 warships into our space because it did not believe we could stop them. A delegate from the Keth Directorate, seated 3 chairs from where Admiral Corrin's representative was sitting, raised a formal objection. He argued that the UEF's response had been disproportionate and that the destruction of 14 Council vessels constituted an act of aggression regardless of how the initial violation was framed. I let him finish. Then I placed the 5th document on the table. This was the full engagement log from Commander Reyes's Vega 9 command, cross-referenced with Director Park's Luna Station authorization record and the intercept platform activation sequence for the inter-system engagement. Every weapons discharge. Every authorization request. Every compliance offer made to Council vessels. Every refusal those offers received. The UEF issued verbal withdrawal orders on 4 separate occasions, I said, before any defensive action was taken. Those orders were refused each time. Director Park issued a separate compliance offer to the 3 vessels that entered the inter-system defense zone. That offer was also refused. Every action taken by the UEF was taken after a refusal to comply. Every action was taken within our own territory. Every action was taken by personnel operating under explicit authorization from UEF Earth Command. I looked at the delegate who had raised the objection. The same galactic law that governs this chamber, I said, recognizes the right of any sovereign territory to defend its borders against unauthorized military incursion. We did not pursue the Council fleet. We did not cross into Council space. We did not fire first. What we did was exactly what any sovereign power is entitled to do when a military force enters its territory without authorization and refuses orders to withdraw. The delegate sat back down. I gave the chamber another moment. Then I reached into my briefcase one final time and placed the last document on the table. It was a treaty. Drafted by the UEF legal team, reviewed by 3 independent galactic law scholars, and approved by Earth Command and the UEF Legislative Council before I had left for this session. 47 pages. Printed clearly in every language used by Council member states. The United Earth Federation is not here to demand reparations, I said. We are not here to withdraw from the Council. We are not here to escalate. We are here because we believe that what happened at Vega 9 happened because the rules that govern the relationship between the Council and its member states are incomplete. They do not clearly define the consequences for unauthorized military entry into a member state's territory. They do not protect younger member states from being treated as subordinates rather than equals. We are here to fix that. I slid copies to the Council's record keeper. This treaty proposes 3 things. First, a clear definition of unauthorized military entry. Any fleet entering a member state's territory without prior notification and formal permission is in violation of the entry treaty, automatically and without exception. Second, the establishment of a mandatory arbitration period for all trade disputes before any enforcement action is authorized. Third, recognition of the right of all member states, regardless of their tenure in the Council, to respond to unauthorized military incursion with full defensive force. I closed my briefcase. The UEF has been a Council member for 30 years. We have followed the rules. We have participated in the arbitration process. We have attended every session, contributed to every humanitarian fund, and honored every treaty we have signed. We have done all of this while being told, implicitly and sometimes explicitly, that we are the youngest species at this table and that we should be patient and that our time would come. I looked at Chair Veth, who was watching me with an expression I could not entirely read. Our time, I said, has come. The chamber was quiet for a long time after that. Long enough that a few of the journalists in the public gallery began whispering to each other, probably wondering if someone was going to respond or if the silence itself was the response. Then Chair Veth leaned forward and said, very carefully, Ambassador Vasquez. Are you telling this Council that what happened at Vega 9 was a warning? I thought about that question for a moment. I thought about Commander Reyes at her console, watching 14 ships cross the border. I thought about Corporal Osei on the Sovereign Reaches Bridge, reading a document that rated humanity as a minimal threat. I thought about Director Park at Luna Station, watching 3 ships run toward what they thought was open space. No, I said. I am telling this council that it was a demonstration. The difference matters. A warning is about what might happen. A demonstration is about what already did. I let that settle. Then I added, I look forward to the council's review of our proposed treaty. We are prepared to discuss every section in detail. We are prepared to listen to amendments. What we are not prepared to do is return to a relationship in which the word correction is considered an appropriate term for sending a military fleet into our home. I stood up. I picked up my briefcase. We will be available for formal session tomorrow morning, I said. Thank you for your time. I walked out of the grand chamber alone. The same way I had walked in. Behind me, the chamber stayed very, very quiet. Part 5 begins here. The notification arrived on my personal pad at 6:03 Station Standard Time, on a morning that looked like every other morning at Vega, 9, cold light through the viewport, the distant hum of the station's life support system, the particular silence of a frontier outpost before the shift change. I was already awake. I read 31 names every morning before I do anything else. I have done this since the day of the engagement. I read them out, quietly, one by one, taking enough time with each name to actually think about it. It takes about 4 minutes. It is the most important 4 minutes of my day. Sergeant Neil Grant. He was fine, returned to active duty 6 weeks after the engagement. Private Ade Collins, who took the hit from the ARC staff in Corridor 7, was still in recovery and expected to make a full return. Private Suki Tanner had been promoted to corporal for conduct during the boarding action. That was the living names. Then there were the 31 who were not living. I read those too. Every name. Then I picked up my pad and read the notification. It was from Ambassador Vasquez's office, Council ratification confirmed. Treaty signed by all 5 elder species and 12 affiliate states. Enters force at 8 o'clock Council Standard Time. Full press release and documentation attached. Congratulations, Commander. I set the pad down on the console and looked out the viewport for a moment. 6 months ago, a council fleet had crossed my border and a men had laughed at me over a communication channel. Now every species in the Galactic Council had formally signed a document that said, in 47 pages of careful language, that they would never do anything like that again. Not without permission. Not without going through the proper channels. Not while treating a human station as a formality to be pushed aside rather than a boundary to be respected. I should probably say that I felt triumphant. That would make for a cleaner story. In reality, what I felt was more complicated and more quiet. Satisfied, maybe. Settled. The way you feel when something has been finished that needed finishing, and you are still standing at the end of it. The shift change happened at 6:30, and the station came alive the way it always does, voices in the corridors, the smell of food from the crew mess, the sound of boots on the grating. I let the noise happen around me and stayed at my console because I had work to do. At 7:45, a transmission came in on the diplomatic channel. The sender identification read, Council Cultural Exchange Program, Official Delegation. Requesting permission to enter UEF Vega border zone for approved cultural observation visit, authorized under new Treaty Article 14. I ran the authorization check against the new treaty database. The request was legitimate. The documentation was complete. The delegation was unarmed. I verified that against the sensor data that came in with their approach vector. They were 4 ships. Small ones, not warships. They had filed all the correct paperwork. The whole authorization process took 11 minutes, which is faster than it takes to get clearance to land a civilian transport at some Earth airports. I sent the permission grant and watched the 4 ships enter the border zone on the correct approach corridor, at the correct speed, with their transponders broadcasting exactly as required. That was how it worked now. It had not been an easy 6 months between the engagement and this morning. I want to be honest about that because I think honesty about difficult things matters more than a clean narrative. The weeks after the engagement were full of briefings, investigations, formal reviews, and an enormous amount of documentation that I and my team had to produce on short notice. Every decision made at Vega 9 was examined. Every order I had given was reviewed by a UEF oversight panel, an independent auditor, and eventually a joint UEF Council inquiry that Ambassador Vasquez had agreed to as part of the treaty negotiation process. The joint inquiry took 10 weeks. It cleared every UEF officer involved. The report stated that all actions taken were within the scope of authorized defensive response, conducted in accordance with both UEF military code and galactic law. It also noted, in its final section, that the Council's operational planning for the Vega mission had contained significant factual errors regarding UEF military capabilities, and that those errors had contributed directly to the outcome. That was the most diplomatic way possible of saying that they had come in certain they were dealing with a minor inconvenience, and they had been wrong, and people had been lost because of that. The Council's investigation into its own command structure resulted in several things. Admiral Corrin retired from the Keth Directorate's fleet 6 weeks after the inquiry concluded. He was not forced out publicly, but the timing left little to interpretation. 3 other senior officers received formal censures. The Council's internal classification of humanity as a Class 2 nuisance civilization was officially removed from all active documentation and replaced with a reclassification that I was told, secondhand, was simply titled Full Member, Standard Standing. I found that last part quietly funny. The Cultural Exchange delegation cleared the border zone at 8:03 and sent a polite thanks for your cooperation message on the standard diplomatic band. I sent back a standard welcome acknowledgement. It was completely routine. That was the point, it was supposed to be routine. I want to tell you about what happened at the Council in the weeks after Ambassador Vasquez's presentation, because I think it is the part of this story that most people focus on least, and it is the part one think about most. The treaty that the UEF brought to the Council table changed things in ways that went beyond the specific clauses it contained. It changed them because of what it demonstrated about how humanity thinks and operates. Not just the military engagement, any species can train for combat. It was the combination. A military engagement conducted within the law, documented completely, followed immediately by a legal and diplomatic response that used the Council's own rules to hold the Council accountable. Beginning to end, every step on record, every decision defensible. 2 other species in the Council moved quickly to explore similar border sovereignty provisions for themselves. The Harith, a small and long-ignored member species from the outer rim of Council space, formally requested that the UEF share the legal framework used to draft the new treaty. Ambassador Vasquez agreed, with the condition that any derivative treaty had to go through a similar process, full documentation, proper authorization, no shortcuts. The Harith Treaty was signed 4 months later. The Seal, another smaller member species, began formal drafting of their own version within weeks of the Harith signing. The elder species noticed. They could not ignore it. The Council had spent thousands of years operating on an implicit hierarchy. The older species set the terms and the younger ones adapted. That hierarchy had not collapsed. But it had shifted. Not dramatically, not all at once, but in the way that large things change when one piece moves that was supposed to be fixed. Chair Veth reached out to Ambassador Vasquez privately, through a non-official channel, about 3 months after the treaty ratification. The message was brief. It said that the chair had been thinking about the events at Vega 9 and their aftermath, and that she had concluded humanity's handling of the situation had demonstrated a maturity the Council had not expected. It asked, carefully, whether the UEF might be interested in taking on a more active role in Council governance. What followed from that message was a conversation that lasted 3 months and involved a great deal of formal deliberation on the UEF side. The result was that humanity accepted a permanent seat on the Council Security Panel, not a junior advisory seat, not a rotating participation slot, but a full voting seat with equal standing to the 5 elder species. I was not in the room for any of those conversations. I was here, at Vega 9, doing my job. But on the morning the security panel confirmation was made public, Captain Owen Garrett of the Alderan sent me a message that consisted entirely of 3 words, "We did it." I sent back 2 words, "We did." Something else happened that I have not mentioned yet, and I mention it now because it is part of the full truth of these events. About 2 months after the engagement, the Council formally requested an accounting of the losses on their side. It was a procedural request, part of the joint inquiry process. The UEF provided the full documentation. What the documentation contained was not something I had been braced to see laid out so plainly. 604 Council crew members had been aboard the 14 ships that entered human space. Of those, 211 survived. Most of the survivors were crew from the vessels that had been disabled rather than destroyed, and they were in UEF custody, receiving medical care and being treated correctly under the terms of the Joint Inquiry Agreement. 211 survivors. Out of 604. I am not putting those numbers here to make anyone feel satisfied. I am putting them here because they are true and because the truth of them matters. 604 people had followed Admiral Corrin's orders and come into our space believing the mission assessment that said this would be a 94% success. They had not known about our defensive capabilities. They had not known about the cauldron hidden behind the moon, or the inner system grid, or what the patrol ships were capable of when handled by experienced captains who were protecting their home. The 393 who did not survive, I have not read their names the way I read our 31. I would not know how to do that correctly. But I know the number. I will always know the number. War, and I use that word carefully because officially this was classified as a defensive engagement, not a war, does not produce clean outcomes. It produces outcomes that you have to keep living with after the tactical displays go dark and the documentation is filed and the treaty is signed. The living with it is the hard part. Not the decisions. I stand by every decision made at Vega 9, by every officer in this engagement. The living with it. The young council advisor who came to Vega 9 on the cultural exchange visit was named Sale. He was Orion, small, pale, with the very large eyes that his species tends to have. He arrived in the third week of the delegation's stay and was assigned to a station observation program, which meant he spent a lot of time in the corridors of Vega 9, asking questions and taking notes on a small data pad. He found his way to my office on a Thursday morning. He knocked, which was polite. I invited him in. He sat down across from me and looked around the office for a moment, at the framed sector maps on the wall, at the duty roster on the screen, at the small photograph of my crew that I keep on the corner of my desk. Then he looked at me. "Commander Reyes," he said. His voice was careful. He was choosing his words. "I have been reading the engagement documentation as part of my research assignment. I wanted to ask you something directly, if that is acceptable." "Go ahead," I said. In all of the UEF's documentation of the engagement, there is no record of any preemptive strike by human forces. Every action taken was in response to the Council fleet's advance. Every offer to withdraw was genuinely offered. And yet the outcome was total. He paused. "How is it that you were so prepared?" "The Council's assessment said that a meaningful defensive response was unlikely." "How did you know to be ready for this?" I thought about the question for a moment. It was a real question. He deserved a real answer. "The Council's assessment was based on what they knew about us," I said. "What they saw, our patrol ships, our station, our public military documentation. They assessed based on observable information, which was reasonable. The problem is that human defense planning has never been based on what we want others to see. It has always been based on what we might need to survive. Those are two very different starting points." He was writing on his data pad. He looked up. "But why?" he said. "Your species has not faced an external threat since first contact. Why continue building systems that were never used?" I thought about how to explain this. About the long and complicated history of humanity, the centuries of conflict between nations, the careful and painful process of learning to work together, the way every generation of people had looked at the generation before them and decided to keep certain things, just in case. "Because," I said, "we remember what it cost to be unprepared. Not with other species, with ourselves. We spent centuries being the threat that other humans were afraid of. We know what it looks like when something dangerous is coming, and we know what it costs to not be ready. We do not build these systems because we expect to use them. We build them because the day we stop believing we might need them is the day we are wrong about something important." Sale wrote that down. He asked me a few more questions about station operations and crew training, and then he thanked me and stood up to leave. At the door, he paused. "Commander," he said, "I have spoken to several people on the station over the past 3 weeks. Crew members, engineers, the medical team. All of them are very ordinary. They talk about meals and rotations and their families. They have complaints about the heating in certain corridors. They are not what I expected when I came here." "What did you expect?" I asked. He thought about it. "Something more obviously formidable," he said. "Something that looked like a warning." I nodded slowly. "That is the point," I said. He left. I turned back to my console. On the main screen, the 4 cultural exchange ships were following the approved transit corridor into the border zone. They were exactly where they were supposed to be, doing exactly what they had been authorized to do, causing no problems at all. The sensor readings were green across the board. Beyond them, the border was empty and quiet. I picked up my coffee. I looked out the viewport at the dark. Vega 9 is an outpost on the edge of human space. People who have not been here imagine that the edge of human space is dramatic, a sharp line where the familiar ends and the unknown begins. It is not dramatic. It looks like any other region of space. Stars in the distance, the cold light of a sun that is too far away to warm anything, the hum of the station keeping everything alive. What makes it the edge is not what it looks like. It is what it means. It is the point at which our space ends and someone else's begins. And what happened 6 months ago, the thing that brought 14 ships across that line and sent none of them back, had been about what that line meant. Whether it was real. Whether we would defend it. Whether anyone on the other side needed to take it seriously. They knew now. A council fleet had crossed into human territory. Not one had come back alive. And in the months that followed, the galaxy had adjusted, quietly, carefully, but clearly, to include in its understanding of humanity a fact that had always been true and that had simply never been tested in quite this way before. We are not the youngest species at the table. We are not the smallest or the least experienced or the most emotional. We are what we have always been, a species that came from a difficult place, that learned difficult lessons, that built its strength quietly and without announcement, and that is prepared to defend what is its own. The border was quiet now. It would probably stay quiet for a long time. I read 31 names every morning. I will read them for the rest of my life. The coffee was good. The viewport was clear. The stars outside were exactly where they were supposed to be. I had work to do.